Every veteran has a story, some filled with sacrifice, some with struggle, some with triumph. This is a place where those stories are heard. From service to survival, from battlefield to brotherhood. Welcome to Warfighters United. Real veterans, real conversations with real impact. Today, we're going to talk to you about some of the initiatives, legislatively wise, in the nation that are going on right now. And today we have Derek Blumke, who is the Grunt Style Foundation Policy Fellow. He's also the State Legislative Director for Michigan VFW, and he's the Psychiatric Drug Safety Chairman subgroup of the Governor's Challenge. Derek and I, over the last few months, have been working on initiatives here in Michigan, but far more better, he's been going down to Washington, D.C. and advocating for veterans across the nation. Derek, welcome to Warfighters United.
Eric, great to see you here in this setting, my friend.
Yeah. So this is a very important role that you've been playing over the last decade. Tell me about some of the events that have been happening in Washington, D.C. over the last couple of weeks.
Well, this past Monday, I was at an event, the Maha Institute, Intercompass Initiatives National Summit on Mental Health and Over-Medicalization. And while we were there, we were surrounded by experts around the world, wonderful panelists, people with incredible and harrowing stories of adverse drug events, drug cocktails. But the big story from the day was Secretary Kennedy of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services making an announcement of a whole slew of reforms to make mental health prescribing practices safer across the nation. And it was a profound, it was something that we've been fighting for 8 years, the Grunt Style Foundation for the past 3 years. And for many, people have been working on this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And the announcement of last Monday was significant, and it comes without precedent in modern times.
You know, we were talking about this in the past couple of months. In the 1980s, they had the big opioid epidemic. And when that kind of put a kibosh to that, and they started noticing the impact that was doing to our nation's individuals and civilians and military, they put a stop to that. Yeah. But then SSRIs, the new billion-dollar industry, started coming on the market. How did that play over the last 20 years?
Well, it goes back 30, 40, even 70. If you look at the benzodiazepines being introduced to market in 1955 and doubling of female suicides during that period, because they were targeted towards women, this campaign of Mothers Will Help Her. But we had a declining suicide rate pretty much across all populations coming to the 80s, down to the 90s, and then we hit the early 2000s. And what we saw is initially several new classes of medications, one specifically selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, were marketed as being a safe, effective medication, much safer than previous generation antidepressants and others. But what we were sold was, I think, a bottle of lies in many cases. And while many people are benefited from these medications, at the same time, we've had a crisis of prescribing of these drugs. So when we're talking about medication safety, generally we're thinking about opiates, and we're thinking about the opiate epidemic. But where we're at today is it's not just opiates. It's a whole series of drug classes, individual drugs, drug classes, vaccine issues, where we have not been told the truth about how some of these medications came to market, misrepresentation in trials, and the end result is folks like you and me, veterans and civilians nationwide, being prescribed these medications and not being properly informed of the side effects and risks of a lot of these commonly prescribed medications. So, for example, 155,000 veterans have taken their own lives since 2001. That's 21 times the number of troops that killed themselves in combat, that were killed in combat from 2001 to present day. We have approximately over 6,500 veteran suicides nationwide annually. We've not dropped below 6,000 since 2001. Veteran suicides at the VA, approximately 2,600 veterans killed themselves this past year. Where we're at with this issue is we're told that if we get more veterans into the VA, we're going to have better outcomes. But the reality is that we've medicalized mental health, not just across the country, but really more so at the VA. And so the end result of that is is rather than treating a lot of mental health struggles as situational, as environmental, job loss, divorce, people going through challenging times, especially this time of disruption with AI and artificial intelligence. But where we're at is an epidemic of people just not understanding what they're getting into, and so that's kind of what we've been fighting on. And this past Monday, Secretary Kennedy announced they'd be doing a whole series of reforms. One is retraining the mental health and medical workforce on adverse medication events. So when doctors see side effects happening to the patient, they're actually seeing the side effect. They're not seeing, oh, I got the diagnosis wrong. This is actually bipolar. We got this wrong. So I think that's wildly important. We also got national standardized tapering guidelines, because in many cases when we've been told, oh, just cut your pills in half for a few weeks, cut them in half for a few more weeks, and you can stop. For some of these medications you've been on for years, antidepressants, benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and then antidepressants specifically, the most commonly prescribed, Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa. What we found is that a lot of people find themselves trapped on these medications, and not like an addiction, what we think of with like cocaine or heroin, but drug dependence, where the body is dependent on that medication, and if you make too fast of changes, it can result in, for some cases, neurological injury, physiological injuries, and horrific withdrawal episodes. So those are just a few, but one of the big ones is actually changing the billing codes.
Really?
Yeah. So like, this is wild, because like, I've been working on this issue for 8 years. I've been engaging HHS leadership for the past year. Myself and a kind of a small slew of advocates have been engaging VA and HHS. I've learned to follow the paths of least resistance, and that has been with U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and really looking more upstream anyway, because a lot of the answers we've received from the VA over the years has been, well, we can't do this, we can't do increased training, we can't do reform deprescribing guidelines. It has to come from HHS, it has to come from FDA, it has to come from SAMHSA. Well,
right,
they're now doing these things, and so it's significant, and moving away from this medicalization of mental health. The pill first approach is the large change.
Well, and you and I both have had that circumstances. You know, you got 70% of veterans that go to the VA that are on some kind of SSRI or a psychotic drug. And then you have 20% of all Americans, civilians included, that are on depressants, which is the highest out of any country in the world.
Yes.
United States, 20% are on depressants.
So it's 16% antidepressants and then 20% psychotropic medication.
Psychotropic.
But still, these are profound numbers. Like 1 in 6 Americans are on a mental health medication.
Yeah, I mean, that's astounding that, and I can't believe that average day Americans don't see this going on, and if they don't see it, they don't know it. And so that's kind of what we're here doing today is trying to let the public know that this is a crisis that's happening in the United States.
Absolutely. And where we're at today is that with the VA, we have a closed health system where they can control the care of an individual from soup to nuts, from getting vaccines, getting annual physicals, very severe and significant surgeries, complicated surgeries. They can do pretty much everything.
Yes.
And as a result, they've got some really great data on what's been going on. They also are able to do inspections, investigations of the health system in a way that you can't in the private sector, where the VA, we've got this nationwide system of care. You've got this broken up in regions. You've got it broken into facilities where they've got catchment areas. And what we have is multiple investigations finding that in 2 major health systems, most health records show no documentation of informed consent.
So talk to me about informed consent. You know, that is something that's huge. It seems like it's common sense. I mean, to me, it seems like it'd be common sense when you go in for a surgery. They go over all the complications of that surgery. They make you sign for it. But when you go see say you're a guy getting out of the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, and you get out of the military and you start noticing you're having issues, whether it's PTSD, depression, I mean, you name it, there's a slew of them, and you go see a psychologist, over at the VA. Next thing you know, they give you a bottle of pills.
Yeah.
Right? That veteran doesn't know what these pills are, what they do, what the complications are. And of course, when they give you the pills at the pharmacy, they give you 8 pages of really tiny writing that hardly any veteran's probably going to look at. Now, I'm going to say I've been stupid and not looked at them as well.
This long of a printout on tissue paper, and you're supposed. This is how you're supposed to understand the side effects or the risks of the treatment you're being provided.
Well, and a lot of those words are so big we don't know what they mean.
And at the point you're being prescribed, you are by definition a psychiatric patient.
Yes.
And so
what would the written consent do if everything gets passed? And I know over the last 2 weeks, there's been huge movement. You've got 35 big nonprofit organizations, along with now you're starting getting backing from the White House and from the VA system, from HHS and the Maha Institute. What is that going to do for our veterans, and how will that be helpful?
Well, this conversation about informed consent, not everybody totally understands it. And for the average patient, and right just now, in the way you were detailing this, veteran goes to the VA, goes to a psychologist. Most people don't know the difference between a psychologist, social worker, or psychiatrist, and only a psychiatrist in that group can prescribe a medication. And so as a result, when you don't know what you're getting into from your continuum of care, counseling, physical therapy, whatever it may be. When you don't understand how this works completely, you also are having gaps where you're not being informed of the side effects of these treatments. So, as an example, mania and psychosis or psychotic events are on the warnings of these medications that can be induced from commonly prescribed SSRIs, like you're on Zoloft, Prozac, Celexa, a few other drugs. And what we have is that somebody's prescribed a medication. They go in the doctor. They're screened, because remember what happens every time we go to the VA, we call the VA.
Yep, you get screened.
Yep, get screened. You get asked if you're thought about hurting yourself. How are you doing today? How are you doing today? How are you doing today? And it's not a benign question. It is a question probing for, do you need therapy? Do you need treatment? And if you say yes to enough of those questions, you are under our model, this medicalized model of mental health, the first thing that we're going to do is prescribe you medication. And our providers weren't properly educated on these medications in medical schools. They were withheld information on dependency. I've met 3 doctors throughout my care in the past year at the VA where in 2 cases they tried to prescribe an antidepressant. I shared in one case that I don't feel comfortable with the risk profile of that medication. Had a horrific year-long withdrawal from Zoloft. The doctor looked at me and said, "I've never heard of that before." I had another case where my primary care doctor tried to explain to me how depression is caused, and it's a chemical imbalance and a deficiency in serotonin in the brain. Mm-hmm. This is a long known from the advocacy community, and more recently for the nation's public as a whole. That's not true. It was a marketing scam by the drug companies, because they knew patients wanted to know how their medications worked, and they didn't have an answer, and so they needed to say something. And
just so you know, we're not here saying that drugs are bad.
No, that's
medications are bad.
No,
right?
Many people.
No, all we're trying to do
these things
is inform people about what these drugs do, what the interactions are, and for a lot of your veterans, 3, 4, 5 medications. I mean, I know myself, I've been on 10 plus medications at one point in time, 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it didn't do me any justice. There was a lot of counter interactions. And so this is going to help fix that, right?
Oh, big time. I mean, so going back to where we began with this informed consent component is, if the patient knows that they could, mania is a possible side effect of one of these medications, they can, if they're having this experience, they know to call their doctor.
Yes.
And when they show back up to the doctor's office, the doctor has been now retrained and can actually see that for what it is, and that's an adverse medication event versus, I got the diagnosis wrong. This is not depression. This is bipolar. this actually gets them to the point where they can do proper care and get them the proper treatment and get them to the right places and get them to counseling, and steering away from this 1 pill, 2 pill, 3 pill, 5. So I think that where we're at is a point in history that we haven't seen since Theodore Roosevelt, and the Pure Food and Drug Act that he pushed, which came as a result of toxic and horrible conditions in some of our meatpacking plants in Chicago and elsewhere, just as an example. And so what we're seeing today is a renewed focus on the safety of the consumer products that we are provided. And a medication may not sound like a consumer product to everyone listening to this, but the reality is that it very much is. It's whether it's a car that's designed to be dangerous, or whether it's a chemical that's known to cause cancer, or whether it's a medication that can result in an overdose or suicide or active violence, whatever it may be. These things are things that people need to be properly informed of. And just to emphasize how important this is, 35 national veterans groups signed on to a letter calling for the passage of legislation in Congress that would require written consent VA-wide.
Right, and Grunt Style and the VFW has been fighting this battle for years. I mean, I know you've been doing it for 10. Just over the last couple of months working with you down at the VFW legislative side, I started seeing a lot of things that I didn't even recognize were going on. And it struck me as I was dumbfounded on some of the people giving opposition to this. I mean, that I couldn't believe that anybody, like I said, it seems like common sense.
Yeah, well, there has been pushback. It's come from a lot of the trade groups, specifically the American Psychiatric Association. They've got a real vested interest in this model. What they saw with greater and strengthened informed consent policies of the VA on opiates was, I believe, 37% reduction in prescribing of opiates at VA because patients became more aware of the risks. For APA and psychiatry, this is existential for that profession, and that if it's found that these medications and laxed safety protocols and prescribing has been causing harm to the public, and the risks of adverse events are greater than the benefit, they've got a problem on their hands. And that's where a large chunk of this has come from. So like the talking points that have been floating around Capitol Hill, state legislature, have been stigma. And well, if we're talking about this issue, stigmatizes mental health treatment, is what they're saying. That's false.
Yeah, that's completely false.
Yep, straw man argument that makes no sense, does not stack. The reality is this is a human right. Informed consent is an example. This came from the Nuremberg trials, 1946, after Himmler and Göring were prosecuted by a former Supreme Court justice or sitting justice at that time. And then following those prosecutions, went to the prosecutions of the doctors. And that's where the Nuremberg Code came from, which guides, it was the basis of informed consent and treatment for generations and for where we're at today. And the reality is that there's a belief that patients can't handle this information, that if we tell them all these risks, that they may not take this treatment that they need to save their lives. Well, if you are withholding this information, you're actually putting people
at jeopardy,
grave danger.
Yes,
grave danger. Yeah.
Well, talk about the grave danger. There's many circumstances, many situations where guys have been prescribed Zoloft or Prozac, right? And a week later they commit suicide. I know that you've got a few. Why don't you tell us about that? Give us some examples of how this is so detrimental, and if they would have known this beforehand, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. There's a couple specific cases. My friend Brian and Kim Brumfield, they lost their son Connor. He was 22 years old. He was an Army veteran. He was in a Jeep rollover, and he had a mild TBI. He got out of the military. He was doing great. He was going to college at Montana Tech in Butte, Montana. Him and his best friend from active duty, like really living a life. They just paid off his new truck, was doing a job interview the next day, was set up to purchase a typewriter from somebody selling one on Facebook Marketplace 2 days later. But he went in to do a vision test, was screened for depression. They found he had mild depression. The doctor prescribed him Wellbutrin, which is an antidepressant. Did not inform Connor of the risks of that treatment. His parents saw dramatic changes in his behavior in those 8 days, but they had not any clue that their son had been prescribed a medication that had a risk of suicide, and it was contraindicated for people with brain injuries. And so Connor, 8 pills and 8 days later, shot himself with a 30-06 World War I era rifle with his roommate at home.
Oh my goodness. And and that's not uncommon. I was prescribed Wellbutrin for years because I wasn't diagnosed with TBI, yeah. And ended up in a mental institution for a month. Finally I went down to 22 Project, had some scans, and then when I figured it out and I started connecting the dots, then hanging out with you and realizing some of these contraindications, I started putting the dots together and saying, wow, if I wouldn't have been on this drug, maybe this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many times that's happened to our veterans or even our civilians all across the nation.
It's too common. I mean, another case, Hunter Whitley, and this is where the VA is unique in that we have Office of Inspector General that investigates issues and issues with care at the VA. What they found is that young man had been prescribed 2 different medications, hydroxyzine and another antidepressant. He killed himself, I believe, 3 weeks after being prescribed those medications. What we have with the loss of Hunter was the VA did an OIG investigation and found the provider had even admitted that she'd not discussed the box warning for suicide risk with the young man. Both him and Connor, both were under to 24 years old, and that is within the warning from the FDA for suicide risk.
Well, and the crazy part, so the VA does ask you all those questions when our veterans come in every time you go to an appointment. But in the civilian sector, they don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, so you have millions upon millions of people in the United States that are going to see a doctor that are getting prescribed these kind of drugs.
Yep.
And they're not telling them about the side effects. Just think about the change that could make throughout the country.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, this is profound. Like what HHS has done has basically given one permission, but also has set the standard of what's to come for not just the VA, but for the entire nation. Let me rephrase. For the entire nation, and then vis-a-vis the VA. Mm-hmm. Because what's to come is the 70% of veterans being prescribed these medications at the VA will be getting proper informed consent. We will be addressing the issues where we found failures in informed consent and documentation, informed consent and health records. We'll be retraining our doctors at the VA just as we will with the rest of the nation on adverse medication events, identifying signs of side effects, how to properly taper a national standard on how to taper people off these medications. And what we believed all along that there would be a tipping point, whether it was at the VA with informed consent, whether it was HHS with strengthened informed consent policies or training for providers or changes in standards. The reality is that any one of these dominoes tipping tips the whole apple cart.
Nice.
And the reason for this is that once we have these announcements and once we have these admissions that we need to strengthen our informed consent policies, we need to retrain our providers, you then have to ask yourself why. And then that's when you start going down this slope of what are all these side effects? Like, what do you mean we're going from an antidepressant to a sedative? McKinsey Brain Institute found that there is a 300% greater likelihood of being prescribed a sedative post initial SSRI prescription, a 400% greater likelihood of being prescribed a stimulant. Within VA, I think you and I both know what that experience has been like. but the civilian sector as well. Like people being on these medication cascades. And you asked earlier how I kind of got on this path. Well, I'm a veteran, and in this country, that's the first thing that we do is pill, and that's exactly what happened to me. Started with a stimulant instead of an antidepressant, and then went from a stimulant to a sedative or Ambien for a sleep medication, then another depressant, gabapentin for anxiety, and then three more medications, and game over. Career's over, life's over, and
and you're a walking zombie.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't really know.
So that kind of got out of this.
Yes,
Tailspin.
And to be honest with you, for all the veterans out there that are on polypharma, I highly, would ask you to look at those lists of medications, meet up with your psychiatrist, your doctors, and say, can you go over with these with me and tell me what the contradictions are between this one and that one? I mean, that is probably one of the greatest things that a veteran can do if they're on anything more than 3 or 4 medications is immediately go to their doctor and say, can you go over these with me just so I know what these are doing to me, to my body, to my brain, to my health, and see what you can do and if it's correct.
And the key thing here is talk to your doctor. Yes. Do not go and do this on your own.
Well, you talked about the tapering, and so how important is tapering? Like, a lot of people don't understand what tapering is.
Yeah.
As especially veterans, they're like, they say I should get off this one. I'm just going to cut it cold turkey. But then what happens?
Yeah. Well, what happened is that when we did this trials for these medications to get these drugs approved, so late 80s, early 90s, throughout the 90s and early 2000s are when a lot of the modern class of antidepressants, or SSRI class of drugs, came to market. As they did, we were not really looking for safety. What we were looking for was efficacy, and efficacy greater than that of placebo. And so the drug companies, in order to get their medications approved, Prozac in '88 and Zoloft in 1990, they had to submit 2 6-week trials that showed some level of efficacy or some level of benefit over placebo. Not a benefit over a previous generation antidepressant, just some benefit over placebo. And so the reality is they could have done 20 or 30 different trials and got lucky and found 2 that showed some level of efficacy. Mm-hmm. And so when we're talking about tapering, the recommendations that came from the medical establishment, from the drug companies, which they were aware of dependency risks of these medications when they were coming to market through release documents that have come up, court cases. What really happened is that they when you're on a medication for 6 to 8 weeks with these antidepressants, your body isn't on it really long enough to really start becoming very, very dependent. Some people do, but in most cases they do not. And their recommendations for tapering came off of being on a medication for 6 to 8 weeks. Not 6 years, not 12 years, not 20 years, not like what we're doing today for so many people that are on these medications. 5 years, I think, might be the average for many Americans, especially women, on these medications. Because they just parked on them. The doctor says, well, you wouldn't just stop taking your insulin if you're diabetic, would you? A talking point that's trained to them in medical school to compare real physiological issues with mental health medications, which have no evidence whatsoever of chemical imbalances, deficiencies, or anything of the sort with these diagnoses. And so what they said is cut your pills in half for a few weeks and you can stop.
And see,
or they expanded to become more safer. They said cut your pills in half for 2 weeks, then cut them in half for another 2 weeks, and then stop. And the reality is that my withdrawal from Zoloft, it took a year, and I found out that I was going to be stuck on this drug because I had an acute antidepressant withdrawal event where I had bolts of lightning hitting me in the head, black blips of time vanishing with those lightning bolts, nausea, dizziness, paranoia, to the point where I could barely stand up from the imbalance, had paranoia to the point where I believed the drug industry had a hit on my life. This is 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. No one was paying attention to me or this at that time.
And that's what kind of got you on this road, this path to start making changes so you can look out for all the other people that are going through some of the same things. I know I had some of the same issues when I was getting cut off medications. I did a lot of mine in a 30-day inpatient stay, so it was, they kept on track there where people who aren't.
You think, but then remember how your discharge went.
Exactly.
That discussion.
Yeah, I know.
As soon as a bag of pills, and you're like.
As soon as I went back to the VA, they wanted to put me back on half of them.
Yeah.
Of course, I did not. But this is just everyday America. The things that are happening that we can start changing.
Yeah.
And so, what was it like going to the White House last week? This is an 8-year battle. I'm sure in that 8 years, you probably felt like you failed at times. This was going nowhere. You're hitting roadblock after roadblock. But finally, in the last month, once they started signing these executive orders, once the wheels started turning, all of a sudden you found yourself in the White House. What was that like? I remember I called you and you're like, hey, I got to call you back. I'm going through the Secret Service right now. And I tell you what, I felt so proud for you because that was probably such a defining moment in your life saying, you know what, my 8-year battle, fighting this written consent, fighting for this written consent, trying to make this happen is now starting to get some attention, and everything that you went through to get to that point. I mean, how did that feel knowing that you're going to the White House to not only get more support for what you were doing, but to have people on your side like the 35 nonprofit organizations throughout the United States, Maha Institute, HHS, Senator Kennedy, you got
VFW,
Tuberville, VFW, DAV, all of our commanders' organizations.
Grunt Style Foundation, the seemingly endless list, left, right, and center of veterans groups. It was it came as a result of the panel that I sat on Monday, just a few hours before Secretary Kennedy made the announcement, and I sat on this panel with some of the most brilliant minds on earth around these issues. Dr. Mark Horowitz from the UK, who was a psychiatrist that had been an antidepressant for 10 years, and when he followed the guidelines to get off the antidepressant he was on while he was in medical school, he had the same horrific withdrawal experience that I did, probably about the same year that I went through it. And so Mark went on to write prescribing guidelines to make these tapers slower and smarter and safer, called hyperbolic tapering. Anders Sorensen from Denmark, brilliant psychologist and researcher. And where it was at with my friend Kim Witzak and Laura Delano, who helped organize that summit. It came because we were all speaking the truth, and we were being frank. And when I talked about the suicide rates at VA and a 108% increase for 18 to 34-year-olds since 2001.
Well, and they just came out with suicide. They've always said 22 a day, but the real number just came out. Around 44.
Yeah. Yep. And so, the visit to the White House, I can't go into all the details, because it was a meeting. It wasn't.
No, I'm just asking how you felt about that.
No, it was profound. It was going into a meeting to discuss this issue that similar to the ones that I've had with HHS leadership over the past year, and the reality is that it was a moment, I hope, that all the families who have lost loved ones to this, all the advocates and people who have been fighting alongside me, the Grunt Style Foundation, the VFW, and so many others for the past many years, that it was a moment that we all can pause and say, change is possible. We're coming together. We're fighting together. It's Warfighters United. And what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this generation of combat soldiers who are deployed to the Middle East right now, the war in Iran, that they come back and they're not following the footsteps of their previous generations. And the ways in which that they are instead are pathways forward that set the direction for our nation, like our grandfathers from World War II, who
did for us.
Created the GI Bill, American Legion, writing of the
then
GI Bill.
Then you got our Vietnam veterans that took over after them.
Yep.
That paved the path to make sure every veteran, every military member got the respect that they deserved. And now it's up to us to make sure our next generation, every generation of combat veterans have stood up in one way, shape, or form. And you've got to feel proud that you've been leading this charge to make this happen. Yeah. Now, what are the next steps?
Yeah.
What can people do, next? We're starting to make some forward paces. We're starting to go forward with all of this written consent and all the tapering and all the stuff about the medications. What can somebody do from now on? Like, if you want to get involved, if you want to start helping the fight, what can they do?
First off, call your congressman, your state representative, state senator, U.S. senator for Congress federally. Call on them and ask them to pass the Written Consent Act at the VA. We need this in statute. While the announcement from HHS and Secretary Kennedy was profound, this issue is going to keep popping back up over the years, similar to the benzodiazepines from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, rearing its head again today. We need this in law. We can't just have a hearing. We can't just have a policy directive change. What we've got is a series of safety failures that are resulting in adverse outcomes and diminishing health outcomes for our nation's veterans, families, and for all Americans. So I think calling our representatives and asking for the passage of the Written Consent Act. At the state level, no matter what state you are in, if you're here in Michigan, call your representatives and say you want safer medication practices statewide. We want written consent from the entire state of Michigan for prescribing these psychiatric drugs. We want reformed deprescribing guidelines. We want the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services putting this under a microscope. They've got really wonderful data that they work with the feds on HHS on. So those are the big things. And tie in with the veterans groups. We've got, between the American Legion, VFW, DAV, AMVETS, down the list, we've got the largest footprint going into congressional districts, state rep and state senate districts of any group in the country. And what that translates to is influence over the policies of our nation. And if we are deliberative and if we are coming together between our civilians, our friends, our family members, and the veteran community and the military community at large, we can drive reform that will be looked at maybe in 50 years from now, 100 years from now, in the same way that we look at the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, Theodore Roosevelt. And we can all say that we were part of that. We were part of a reform movement that made our nation's health a priority.
Yes. Well, Derek, I loved getting this information out today. I want to thank you for coming on Warfighters United. Thank you for standing up with Grunt Style, with the VFW, all the organizations that are now backing the written consent, and, if you want to learn more, you can go to warfightersunited.com. If you have any questions or you want to know how to contact anybody about this, you can always email me at warfightersunitedpodcast@gmail.com. My name is Eric Callie. I'm the host of Warfighters United, and we'll see you next time.